And welcome. My name is Dr. Joshua Black, and I work at the BC Center for Palliative Care as the Bereavement Initiative Manager. I've had the pleasure to lead the center's bereavement study since 2021. And then in my spare time, I also host the Grief Dreams podcast. And here with me today is my colleague Stephanie, who'll be running the Zoom for us and also providing some technical support. So next slide. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the BC Center for Palliative Care works with partners across the land colonially known as British Columbia. And the work we do really occurs on the territories of many distinct First Nations. And so we are grateful to all the First Nations who have cared for and nurtured the lands and the waters around us for all the time. I would like to acknowledge that the land in which I live and work is the unceded Stalo territory in what is colonially known as Abbotsford in British Columbia, Canada. And our speaker today, Laurel, is joining in from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in a town colonially known as Ottawa in Ontario, Canada. And we recognize that all of you are joining us online, maybe participating from traditional territories of other Indigenous peoples. So from coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And if you want, please take the time to introduce where you're joining from into the chat. So this is the 10th BC Center for Palliative Care Echo session on our series on grief and bereavement literacy, which we'll be having each month on a different topic, with the topic for next month focusing on bereaved parents. And our past sessions, like last month's on teen grief, they're all recorded and can be viewed, and Stephanie will put the link in the chat if you want to see some other recordings. And so the need to increase grief and bereavement knowledge came from our different research studies with the bereaved and bereavement service providers, with one study being a province-wide roundtable with knowledge users in British Columbia that really aimed to identify priority actions to address the needs of bereaved people and recommend strategies to improve bereavement support services. And the action plan can be viewed in the chat. And so today we're using the Echo platform as it creates a knowledge sharing network to share experience and learning. And today's session, we will have a presentation, some discussion, and Q&A. While we strive to create a safe environment in every Echo session, we recognize that the nature of this touches on both personal and emotional subjects for many. So if you do not feel comfortable sharing your name or image during the session, feel free to turn it off or delete your name or change your name. And so these sessions are going to be recorded, and the recording will be edited before sharing, along with the session summary notes that really capture the discussion, any kind of resources shared during the session. So next slide. And so the production of this presentation has been made possible through a financial contribution from Health Canada. The next slide. And so today's session is titled Grief in the Workplace. And so I just want to introduce you to our presenter. So we have Laurel Gillespie, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association and is a pivotal figure in palliative care. Her journey into this field was really inspired by her own health challenges, driving her to enhance supports for those living with a life-limiting illness. Since assuming leadership in 2021, Laurel has championed initiatives to raise awareness, advocate for policy reforms, and promote best practices nationwide. So under her guidance, the CHPCA has become a leading advocate for dignified end-of-life care through partnerships, advocacy, and also education. So Laurel's collaborative leadership style has garnered widespread respect in the palliative care community, focusing on inclusivity and innovation. And beyond her role, she contributes actively to research and advisory boards, shaping the future of palliative care in Canada. She currently serves on the boards of the Worldwide Hospice Palliative Care Alliance and the Health Charities Coalition of BC or of Canada, and previously served for 7 years on the board of directors of Autism Canada. So what a lengthy bio, but there's so much that you're doing, and I'm really excited that you're here today with us. And so, Laurel, thank you for being here and doing all the work that you're doing in the world. This is really inspiring, and I look forward to sort of hearing more about grief in the workplace from you. And so I'm going to hand this over now to Laurel.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for extending the invitation to present to you today on what is a really heavy subject matter, dealing with grief and bereavement, but so important. And I'd like to acknowledge that these are difficult conversations to have, and the more comfortable we get around discussing what it's like to and sharing our own experiences, we become more comfortable with what grief and bereavement looks like in the workplace. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to support one another in better ways, and to give space. So for any of you that are joining today from across the country, and find yourselves in a time of grief or bereavement, I just wanted to take a moment to give you space for that and honoring you for being here, and hope today that if you get anything out of this is to know that, we are not alone in this journey called life, and that we do have a role to play in supporting one another as human beings. And thank you, Joshua, for that really warm welcome. I'm not sure where you got the long intro from, but wow, whoever wrote it, they did a good job. So how I'd like to play out today here with this presentation is I'm going to go through a number of slides. I'll try not to rush through them. There's a lot of really good information. And at the end, I would invite people to ask any questions, or if you're curious about anything, if you have ideas of how we can make things better, and also invite you to share in your own personal experiences so that we can learn from one another. And also recognizing that this is a safe and coveted space, and that we will respect and not share outside of this meeting today, of what you might lean into. So next slide, please. We're going to launch off, all right, with a poll on how to try to have a little bit of fun with this at the same time. So if you wanted to do a quick assessment of what your current knowledge level on today's topic is, whether you're not knowledgeable at all, somewhat knowledgeable, or very knowledgeable about grief in the workplace. So I believe, yeah, Stephanie has put up the poll for you. I feel like I should have some Jeopardy music going. Do, 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 do. It's the middle of the week. It's a long weekend coming. I'll let us know, Stephanie, when the poll results are in.
All right, I think we'll end it there and share the results there.
Okay, somewhat knowledgeable. That's very encouraging. I would assume that a lot of it is because people are working in this field of healthcare, and that it's kind of a natural, organic thing that would happen as support around that in the workplace. So thank you. Next slide, please. So today I'm hoping that you'll take away the ability to identify different ways in which grief affects employees, including yourself in the workplace. Secondly, to understand the roles played by organizations and what those opportunities might be in terms of how management addresses these in supporting employees and supporting a bereaved colleague, and more comfortable with engaging and meaningfully support grieving colleagues. Next slide, please. So beyond the death of a loved one, we want to acknowledge that grief is a natural human response to any loss. And it doesn't have to be a human loss. And different kinds of loss can include infertility and pregnancy loss, pets, neighbors, a loss of identity, divorce, separation, other important relationships, parental alienation, a loved one affected by substance use disorder or significant mental health illnesses, acquiring a disability or life-altering illness, loss of a home, career changes. There are many different ways that we might, or that grief might touch our lives, and it's not always just losing a loved one. It's important to be compassionate towards each other and acknowledging that we all experience grief at one point or another. And if you hear one story, you've heard one story. Everybody's experience and how they grieve and process things is going to look differently. Next slide, please. So there are kinds of grief that we generally consider that employees may experience, and that is anticipatory grief. So that's when we grieve a loss before it actually occurs. So pre-grieving, like if you have a loved one that has been diagnosed with a serious illness, you're a caregiver and you know that there are fewer sunsets ahead of them or this individual than there are behind them. So you can anticipate that something is going to be coming in the future. There's collective grief when a loss affects a community or a society or a large group of people. We're all experiencing collective grief with some of the things that are happening globally. Natural disasters, I think of, our hosts in British Columbia with the forest fires and the impending season that's approaching us. Mass casualties or other tragedies in our community where we collectively grieve. And then there's disenfranchised grief. So that society or a part of it limits or doesn't expect or may not allow people to express. And when I think of that, I think of, having the experience of having a miscarriage. And, you don't really outwardly talk about it unless you were showing, let's say, that you were pregnant or if you had shared that. So this can cause isolation and additional distress for that bereaved person. Next slide. So what impacts grief and different circumstances? Caregiving is a huge one, and we're hearing that word over and over and over again these days, that providing care for someone, it's a significant responsibility. And I would invite you, something that I'm changing in my practice is when I introduce myself in my own meetings, as I identify as, my name's Laurel. Yes, this is my role, but I'm also a veteran caregiver. And I think when we're open to the fact of sharing that we are experiencing either presently or in our past, that we have that experience, it will sort of help us to feel like we're not alone as caregivers because it's becoming more prominent. But it definitely can affect the relationship that you have with the person that's receiving care. You may find yourself pulling away and not wanting to overcompensate for that impending sense of loss that's coming. So you may grieve the life or the activities that you had before becoming a caregiver or prior to your loved one's illness and their anticipated death, as I mentioned. You may have to turn down career opportunities to prioritize or even family gatherings you may not be able to attend to or your normal day-to-day activities. So grief can also impact religious or cultural beliefs. They can influence a person's reaction to or understanding death and loss. Some cultures don't want to mention it at all because it's believed that they will actually bring upon more death. So there's also cumulative or compounded grief. So when a person experiences multiple losses at once or in a relatively short period of time, they're more likely to struggle to cope with each loss, and they become their compounded effect, or they become successive, that they build on one another to the point where someone's not able to deal with those grieving experiences. Next slide, please. So how does grief affect the workplace? If you don't acknowledge this or appreciate it, there is a direct correlation to lost productivity and definitely morale within the workplace when somebody may be grieving. So the open effects of grief are those that are easy to see and connect to loss, like someone openly showing emotion when expressing. You may find somebody a bit teary-eyed or just not themselves. Like you can't quite put your finger on it, but you're not sure what's up with that person, but there's something off. And there's hidden effects that they're just not easy to notice or connect to someone's sense of loss. Some people may be increasingly irritated, or they might have reduced concentration or be very forgetful. So it's important to recognize that grief can show up in different ways within the workplace. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that, when something does seem off with an individual who seems not quite themselves, there might be more to that. And that often there's a reason behind someone's behavior. And it just to acknowledge and to give some space around that something could be going on that they're not sharing, or maybe don't know how to even approach it with their colleagues. Next slide, please. So there are more obvious ways that you might notice, but some of the signs aren't always noticeable. That a workplace culture that supports well-being and compassion can help somebody to really feel okay and safe to share within the workplace. So when I mentioned earlier, like it may not be very obvious. So for the grieving person, there might be lack of motivation. Their pace of work may be slowed. Again, the concentration may be off. They feel isolated or disconnected. They're not as talkative in the lunchroom space, or chatty in the chat box when we're meeting by Zoom. But their emotions could be intruding on their workday and their productivity. They're probably going to be very tired, slightly irritable, and be very forgetful sometimes. They're going to be feeling not necessarily all the time, but they may feel discouraged from sharing their grief or displaying negative emotions. They don't want to be, I guess, they don't want to be have a spotlight shone on them necessarily, but they're bottling up some of these emotions inside. Some people actually feel nauseated. They are not eating as well. They're having sleeping difficulties. And that can all lead to absenteeism within the workplace due to illness or poor mental health. So for those that are around a grieving person, when we're aware of a loss, which is very helpful, short-term covering for the grieving person while they're on bereavement leave. So we often will have to, step up and take on additional responsibilities and let that person know that we got your back. We're here for you. There could be discomfort or uncertainty in interactions with the grieving person. A typical reaction to this uncertainty is to act as though the loss didn't happen. There could be resentment that their workload may temporarily increase. I have to say that I'm very fortunate that anytime that I've experienced grief, I haven't had anybody resent that they've had to pick up a little bit of extra in order to give me that time to grieve in my own way. Next slide. So how does it, again, like grief in the workplace, management will likely see an increased absenteeism. There would be reduced team performance, productivity, the morale. Tone of the workplace may change. Maintaining balance between work deliverables and providing adequate supports is important for management to acknowledge. Management in and of itself in that machination may feel discomfort or uncertainty in interacting with the grieving person, because this isn't always something that our onboarding or orientations to our workplaces will cover. As we're an organization and we support each other, and here's what our best practices are around grief and bereavement within the work setting. So many people in the management team may experience uncertainty of what the HR policies are and what they allow or disallow for bereavement leave or other types of accommodations, or even just supports in general. So this can kind of sometimes come into this game of management roulette, where they're not sure what to do. The policies aren't really clear. They're vague. They don't want to, say that they're going to support in one way if they don't have permission from the C-suite, as an example. So the organization is going to see that reduced productivity and profitability due to increased mistakes, the absenteeism, maybe missed deadlines, the poor organizational morale. It's less compassionate and welcoming as an organizational culture. And if employees feel unsupported by their workplace, we're going to see less loyalty or a commitment to that organization, higher turnover, and lower employee satisfaction, because one only has to look at, seeing how another person in the workplace was treated or supported. Say they're going to go through a divorce, and the little the gossip wheels start going. And when you see that and you think, well, I'm thinking of getting a divorce, well, how was that person treated? It's not always that human loss, but that's an example. Lower employee satisfaction over time, and that trust and loyalty that we're going to lose out on as organizations. Next slide, please. So the importance of this shift in organizational culture. By human nature, I think when we collectively feel part of a broader community, um, we're more peaceful as people, or we have that sense of, I have a sense of belonging here. And when we're going through difficult times, that shift in organizational culture can make all the difference for some people, particularly if you're dealing with, say, a couple and they've lost, a partner that they've been with for decades. So in work environments where culture doesn't proactively provide space to address grief, there are other negative emotions that employees are likely to share when they're grieving a loss. They're more likely, when they are supported, to ask for leave or accommodations and seek support at work or through work. They're also more likely to feel like their grief should be left at the door, maybe, or they feel disconnected and isolated, and that maybe they'll be reprimanded for having voiced a need around this topic. And they may feel disenfranchised from the organization, or that guilt or ashamed if they're underperforming because of the impact of their inability, and their pace at which they're actually going through a grieving process, which is different for everybody. Next slide, please. So what kind of is the landscape in our country? That we are a nation of compassion in general. But what do these policies actually look like here? So typical bereavement leave and related human resources policies, they're kind of divided up into that, national labor laws, and then each province has their labor codes that they have to follow. So across the nation, organizations must provide leave for 3 days, and sometimes it's unpaid. Some organizations it is paid, but the leave must be taken within a set number of weeks of a death or a funeral. It's reserved for deaths of specified close family members, which is really interesting. So it doesn't often, it could be that favorite uncle, and sometimes these policies don't often take into account that. So labor codes that are provincial, and they vary across the country. It's that 3-day rule. Any of the organizations that would fall under a national labor code, like banks, government offices, other crown corporations, there was a change to Bill C-220, which was an amendment to the Canada Labor Code. It received royal ascension almost, 3 years ago to the day, received royal ascension to allow for any federally regulated organization that has to provide up to 10 days bereavement leave. So it increased the number of days. They're not paid, but it gives a little bit more wiggle room. And for any of you that are joining on the call today, 3 days is clearly not enough to even begin to break down and to process what's happening, let alone 10. It's a step in the right direction, but in my opinion, it's clearly not enough. So that 3 days only really allows people to attend funerals or other rituals related to death. But again, as I mentioned, they can vary from province to province. So most, and hopefully all of you that are employed outside of the home would understand that you do have access to an employee assistance program, hopefully. Some people aren't aware. If you're not aware, those are available, and be sure to ask, or make sure that your human resources department makes sure that people are aware that it exists. Temporary adjustments to work duties, like shorter work days or transfer into a lower stress area or less demanding role in the interim, may be very helpful. But what does it look like in practice? So there was a study that was 131 Edmonton-based businesses, and this is the source. There's a couple pages in this PowerPoint of actual references that we provide for anybody that wants to dive deeper into them. But over 60% of businesses had one or more employees take bereavement leave in the previous year. So this is not, if anything, this is just going to keep going up and up and up, and the needs are going to change. The average bereavement leave paid was 2.5 days, with an added 1.3 days for travel or other death-related matters. only 5% of the businesses paid their employees during this additional leave. So it's punitive, right? If you need to take that time to go through these really difficult times, only 5% of businesses paid their employees. That, how do you show that you really care about the people that are under your employ? 5% of them, 95% that don't support that. I'd love to see that change. Next slide, please. So having a bereavement policy matters. So it matters that when people are aware of whatever their bereavement policy looks like, when people know upfront that they're going to be supported in a time of need, their job is going to be protected. They're not going to be penalized or made to feel guilty or shameful that they're taking this time to process a loss. They're more likely to take bereavement leave upfront, and they're more likely to take a little bit more time. So organizations with bereavement policies that are in place that are supportive are less likely to report concerns about their employees after they return to work. And they're more likely to offer a wide variety of accommodations when they return to work, sort of as a, phasing back into becoming what used to be the normal for them. So accommodations provided by organizations without a policy are usually limited to only shorter work days or work weeks. So again, big giant organizations tend to have policies in place and a bit more flexible. It's the medium and small organizations that are less likely to have formal bereavement leave policies, whereas, as I mentioned, nearly all of the large ones do. So with these HR policies, they should be comprehensive. They should be flexible to account for things like different cultural beliefs or religious practices, different definitions of family or other close relationships, and list a variety of accommodations for the bereaved employees, have them be able to have some choice in what would best support them during this time, and provide training for senior leadership and management of how to interact with those who are coming back to work after an absence. So next slide, please. So are current bereavement leave and human resources policies adequate today? So the Canadian Grief Alliance, they're doing a great job with their grief and bereavement supports and resources. They did the Grief Alliance, which is part of the Canadian Virtual Hospice. They did a survey of nearly 4,000 Canadians, which is a significant sample size, who experienced grief. And it showed some really interesting results. And those key takeaways were 50%, 50, did not feel adequately supported in their grief. And 53 felt their grief wasn't adequately recognized. So I can only imagine how isolating and lonely that would feel going back to a workplace that you didn't feel like there was support there. So notably, a number of those who frequently accessed sources of support were reported to be less helpful than people hoped during that time, including healthcare systems, employer resources, and helplines. So I believe that we can do better, but we must do better. One of the ways that CHPCA is doing this is through our Canadian Compassionate Program. And I know it's not part of this slide presentation, but we're trying to put some of the onus back on corporate Canada to provide these upfront supports, so that when you find yourself in a place where you need to have accommodations made, it's better to support people upfront than have them come back and they're just not ready. They'll end up taking, a 6-month leave or sometimes even longer in the absence of good policies. So we're trying to push the envelope and push the narrative to kind of engage corporate Canada, particularly with an aging population, people with increased and multi comorbidities around disabilities. So I'm hopeful that we'll pick up this initiative and really take off. And I've actually had other countries that have said, okay, how did you do this? How did you start it? And how's it going? So there is some global uptick on it, which is kind of interesting. Next slide, please. So organizational leaders we have such a critical role to play in setting the tone of how we can bring compassion and into play and not just talk about it, but actually walk the talk. So we need to make sure that we follow this care model. And this is from a study that was done in 2021, and it's listed here. Again, it's in the list of resources, but the care model, it's about the communication, that accommodations exist, what those accommodations are, recognizing that someone's going through a difficult time, and providing some emotional support for them. So what are some of the most helpful accommodations would be flexible time for their schedules, the shortened work days, longer or more frequent breaks, work from home arrangements, decrease that workload and that pressure. So you don't feel like, you're having to be under the gun all the time, which is actually a terrible reference, and I should stop using that one. But just that like you're under a pressure cooker. Temporarily reassign some lower stressful tasks and less demanding work duties. Provide somebody with a quieter work areas that will help them concentrate if that's what their preference is. A private area where they can go to take a break or collect themselves should they find themselves, having one of those moments that I know we've all experienced, where it's like, I'm having a moment, something will trigger a memory, or especially when somebody shares something. Next slide, please. So organizations and managers, things that we should avoid, and some of those expectations that, our workplaces, sort of, toughen up and just you show up for work and you have to be at your best all the time, is that back to business as usual really dismisses and dishonors the employee's experience. And that their grief should not interfere with their work, but it's part of who we are and it's part of our experience. And that can't be ignored. And so we treat the employee as though they're fragile sometimes. It's like we want to like walk on eggshells around them, but this can feel infantilizing to them. And they, like they should be grieving differently, or that they're expected to perform or express their grief at work. And I know like some situations, some people come to work and you would expect for them to be on leave. But they need that distraction in order to just get through the initial shock, if you will, of their loss. So they're kind of, everybody does it differently. And so it's not unusual to see people like, nope, I just kind of just have to keep chugging along, and it actually acts as a good distraction for me to keep myself from losing it, right? And often in the workplace setting, our organizations and management will put policy over people. And I really, truly believe that that's the wrong way to go about it. So policy should be put in place such that they provide that support, but it has to be compassionate. And to avoid imposing that bureaucracy on, oh, well, if somebody has a suggestion of, I would really benefit from being able to do X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. And it's like, oh, we could do the X, Y, Z, but the 1, 2, 3, forget about it. They're never going to go for that. So having that compassion and being able to work with someone and walk it with them as they go through this. So good management practice would be to provide those supports and accommodations based on the individual's needs, not a timeline. It's not linear. We know this from the research, but some people may need more supports after a few weeks or months than they do immediately. Like I mentioned, some people have to, they want to come back to work right away, and that's okay too. Check in with them if there's depending on the work size, management can't always do this if we work in a big workplace setting, but if you can, like, check in on anniversaries like Mother's Day or Father's Day, a wedding anniversary, if you know what those birthdays are, if the holidays are coming up that are traditionally something that individual would celebrate, say, how you doing? Even just somebody caring enough to ask that question is, do you have any plans? Or just checking in with them can make a big difference for them, so that they don't feel that isolation, or that they're out of turn in the workplace if they're feeling a bit down. Proactively providing information to all of your employees or all of your team about grief resources, and remind them that they're available, make them visible in the workplace. And when sharing news about an employee's loss with the wider organization, and if it's okay with that employee to share that loss, some people want to remain very private, and that's okay too. but provide reminders on how to be empathetic in your communication to your coworkers. Kind of guidelines. It's not a hard what to say and what not to say, but some guidelines around appropriate language when supporting a bereaved colleague. Encourage mutual support and personalized gestures and collective expressions of support. So a group condolence card. If you haven't, I'm sure, a lot of us have received that, and it does mean a lot to us. But there are things that we definitely should avoid, using cliches such as, oh, it could be worse, or, try to look for the silver lining, at least they didn't suffer. Oh, you had a miscarriage, well, you could have another one. There are a lot of things that people say that have unintended consequences, although they mean well. Just that it can really hit hard when the wrong thing or it's delivered not the right way. Next slide, please. So having that comprehensive policy that provides adequate and, if possible, paid leave for bereaved employees beyond that legislated minimum. If there are flex days in there, like sick days or wellness days, family support days, allow them to use up, or even if they have to take vacation time, or if there's a short-term or long-term disability benefit, ensure that they know that there are options and that they're not going to lose their job because they need some time. So that flexibility built in can account for things like different cultural or religious death-related practices, the non-traditional nuclear family, foster siblings. Those might fall outside of that normal policy that's in place, but that nonetheless, they're important relationships to that individual. And expand those timelines for bereavement leave. And if the organization can afford to, top up those benefits so that people aren't financially penalized for having to take a bit of extra time. So that additional paid leave is an important other factor. And again, it's difficult economic times, but I think if we have the spirit or embrace that intention of being able to do our best as employers and leaders and managers to try to remunerate someone when they're on these leaves to the best of our ability. So I guess make sure that these accommodations can stay in place as long when they do return to work, and know that they're still going to be supported, and that employees are aware of and understand what the bereavement policy is within your organization. And then just fostering that overall, we're a team, we function as a team. We might have a player down, but it doesn't mean the game doesn't still continue. It doesn't mean that the workplace, that it all shuts down, but that we support one another and that we're compassionate towards each other in a time of need. So provide training for managers and leaders on supporting bereaved employees with the best compassionate practices and active listening. And we want to encourage employee wellness, including that work-life balance and mental well-being. Next slide, please. So what can we do? And this is a question that hopefully we put into practice every day, is what could I do differently today if I had a little slip, or if I had a little goof up, or how can I best show up for this person? It's okay to ask somebody about their loss. They may say, I don't want to talk about it, and that's fine, but to acknowledge, I'm really sorry that I understand your experience and loss, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that. How can I best support you? Don't try to fix it or say, like, it can't be fixed, but it can be supported. And you're trying to just make it better for that person, to let them know that they're not doing this, or they don't have to do this in isolation. Follow through on your offers to help, but you don't have to give them something tangible. Like, I know that you may need some additional support. I'd love for some time to sit down and have a cup of tea. I understand you were very close to your grandmother. What was your grandmother's name? Putting a name to that individual or is a helpful way. I know you have some fond memories. I've heard you mention your grandma before. When you're feeling up to it, it could be today, but maybe next week or whenever you feel up to it, I'd love for you to share your favorite stories about grandma with me. Maybe we could do that. I'd love to hear more. Even if you don't end up doing that, even just the gesture of acknowledging that this, and hold space for the fact that this person had meaning to that individual is very beneficial. And just be understanding that that person may not be back to normal or seem like themselves for a while. And that could be, a matter of days, weeks, months, even years. But check in with them around those important anniversaries, as I mentioned before. And if they share their story, they may need to share it with you multiple times. And that's a normal part of the process. But know your boundaries as well. I'm the youngest of 8, and I can tell you, like, I get texts. Sometimes I have my sister who is 18 years between us, so she's 73. You guys can do the math. Um, but I get texts all the time, and my eldest sister is very sick again with a recurring cancer. But I'm getting texts all the time from nieces, and it's like, okay, I have to let my niece know that I'm like, I'm full in terms of how I can support my siblings right now, because I've got it coming from a few different angles. But you have to know what those boundaries are for yourself, and to be able to stand up and say, okay, I'm really sorry your mom's going through this right now, but it's your mom, it's my sister. I've been there for her to have conversations, but right now I'm overwhelmed myself. Could you come back to me in a few days, or I can get back to you when I feel like I have some space to actually deal with this, or to provide some feedback that's being looked for. So you can't help them at this time, and that's okay. And to understand too that for most of us, including myself, I'm not a trained professional in this. I'm just trying to be the most supportive, compassionate person, and acknowledging another person's suffering. And how can I do that well? So remember that somebody could be overtired, their memory can be impaired from it, being forgetful, and ability to concentrate is also really difficult. And it can make you feel tired, irritable, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. So acknowledging that everybody experiences it different. Some people may go over the top with different distractions, go on shopping sprees, whatnot. Everybody processes things differently. But some people find comfort in that familiarity of work, while others might find it's just too demanding. And all of these things are normal and to be expected. Next slide, please. So I touched lightly on this previously about things to say, I know how you feel. I know how you feel. You can say, I struggled when I lost someone, but I don't know what your experience is like. And if you want to tell me about it or share about it, what it's like what it's been like for you, I'm here for you. Just so people don't feel alone. Oh, that they're in a better place, and oh my goodness, at least they didn't suffer. Oh my goodness. That one's like, oh, it's cringeworthy, right? And it's meant to be said with love and the intention of being kind, but it just hits really wrong. You could just say, I'm really so sorry that this is so difficult for you right now. Own it, own the feeling. Saying nothing, again, it kind of goes into that shame and guilt, like somebody shouldn't be feeling the way they are when somebody doesn't acknowledge it or say anything. And it's perfectly fine. It's better to say, I'm not sure what I could say to you, but I want you to know that I care and that I'm thinking about you right now. Everything happens for a reason. Oh my goodness. Everything happens for a reason. That's a good one. I'm sure we've all heard this before, and it's not really helpful. You could ask somebody, how are you doing? And you could share, what does your loss feel like for you today? Like, is there something you're looking forward to doing? I'm happy to go do that with you, or just kind of show up for them in whatever way feels natural to you. How can I help? This is, again, always said with the best intentions, but offer something specific. I want to be here to support you. Can I help you with that Johnson report? Or would it be helpful if I took the lead on project XYZ? Just, I'm a fellow leader. You can hand it off to me. I won't submit anything. I'll give it back to you for review, but let me help you by taking something off. And if there's not, I'd love to take you out for lunch, or I'd like to, but follow through with those offers of support. And there's all kinds of this grief literacy. It's not like we've grown up. I mean, some of us have had that privilege of growing up and becoming comfortable being around somebody who's experienced loss, but many of us haven't. And it's kind of a new new uncharted territory, and we're not sure how to navigate it. But there's lots of tricks and things that we can help to apply, putting our best feet forward in order to support others. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, and just looking at our time, so we have lots of opportunity to share and ask questions. It comes in different forms, and we all react to it differently. I think is that a really important key factor to hold on to. We're all going to experience grief. Some of it will pass easily. Some of it's going to linger for a long time, and some of it will just never go away. But when it comes to grief in the workplace, there really is a responsibility for organizations to step up and to do better. And there's that opportunity. If we don't demand it, or if we don't talk about it with our supervisors, with our management, with our leadership, we're not going to create compassionate workplaces. And I think we're all deserving of that, particularly us that are in that healthcare space. You guys are doubly impacted from it. You're experiencing grief and loss within work itself, and then outside of your workplace roles. Management is responsible for ensuring and enacting these policies to make sure that people are aware that policies do exist, and to what extent, and to what that flexibility allows. And individuals can provide support to colleagues and really validate their feelings and recognize that they're having a loss, and then offer some practical supports by taking something off their hands, or offering to do something for them and following through on it. So next slide. These are just a couple of sheets of references. So I believe that this will be made available to you all. So if there are things that are referenced in here that you want to take a deeper dive into, or share with your employers on coming up with a comprehensive policy, that would be great too. So we're going to go into a Q&A session and open it up, and then we have a quick poll to do at the very end. But who would like to open it up to questions? I'm not sure. There we go. Such a quiet group. My goodness, I don't see any hands. Does anybody have any workplace experiences that they'd like to share of how your colleagues rallied or didn't rally around for you? Cynthia Lapointe.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. I would just like to share, I work at the Teresa Deller Palliative Care Residence in Montreal, Quebec. And we have a community outreach program that we do, various programs, but we're also very involved with compassionate communities. And part of that has been workplace education for grieving. So what we had done recently is we had put together a workshop. It's a 4-hour workshop for managers and managers, vice president, whoever wants to come, who's in a management role at companies, to provide them a training on how to help your employees when they're going through grief and when they're caregiving. So it's kind of two things, because caregiving, even when the person is not passed away, as you've mentioned, anticipatory grief, but also just the overwhelmingness of caregiving that can affect work so much. And these are things we're going to see more and more because there's more and more caregivers. So we find it so amazing. And the nice thing about it is it's completely free. So when we contact the companies, we go right to the HR and we say, look, we can offer you a free training for your managers that will benefit your employees, raise satisfaction in employment, and all of those things, and give ongoing support, because we also have, being a palliative care residence, we offer grief support anyway for the community. So we also offer that if there's any issues, if there's any concerns, you can offer our services, you can pass that on, etc. So it's really been an amazing thing so far. We've only done 2, but we're planning on doing another 4 in the next year. So it's really great.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Cynthia. Would you be able to put a link to your website so that everybody on the call would know where to access it or to learn
Sure.
about it? That would be really helpful because Teresa Delaire's hospice is on the West Island in Montreal.
Oh, you do know us? Okay.
I know, yeah, because I
Okay.
work with
Yeah.
your
Oh.
moms actually.
Okay, great. I'm glad to
Down.
know. It's such
So
a
I'm
great
familiar
place.
with it, but it's people might not be familiar with the spelling and whatnot. So thank you
Okay,
for
I can
sharing
put a
that.
link to the website. The workplace training for managers, it's not on our website because we do it individually. We go to the companies individually, but I can certainly share our presentation because the more
Sure.
we get, and then people can use it just as long as they keep the Teresa Deller name, they can use it. So that's good too.
Amazing.
So I can do that. Can I
Thank
send
you
it
so
to you,
much.
Stephanie? Because is that okay?
That would be
Or
great.
just
Thank you, Cynthia.
okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Okay.
I see a hand up for Kathy Sinclair.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sort of in a unique situation where I'm actually going through this right now. I've just lost both my parents, October and end of December, and I'm in BC and they were living in Ontario. So for the last 3 years, all my vacation time has been used going back and forth to care for them. Dad had cancer. My mom was getting more and more debilitated. Dad was looking after her. And so I mean, I've been very supported by my workplace. They said, whenever you got to go, go, because I said, when I started this job, family comes first, regardless. Never thought this would happen. And very supported by my manager and director. And, I just took the time off, sick time. I emptied all my sick time, all my vacation time, everything. In terms of support around here, I had to go find my own support. There really wasn't a lot I felt that was appropriate. Both of them had maid. So I wasn't only caring for them, then I also had to help with the maid, setting up the maid thing. And then that sort of grief is very different from a regular grief and all the guilt and stuff that goes with it. So I hooked up with the maid family support group for Canada and got in with them, and they were amazing. But I think what I found was that when I first came back to work, so I was off 3 months between the two of them. I mean, I was just about to come back to work, and then Mom on Christmas morning got sick and then passed away. And when I came back, I was very supported, but it wasn't like maybe 2 weeks later, it's like everyone sees you. They expect that you're going to give 100, you're your normal self. You try and be, I'm an educator in the operating room, so I have to be up. I have to be the cheerleader. I'm like two-faced. Like, this is not me. Then I go home and I'm like, done. And so it's this cyclical thing. So this weekend, I'm just heading back to Ontario now with my brother and sister to look after the estate. So that's another 2 weeks of vacation time gone. So there's nothing for, I don't know what to do. Like, there's nothing really to support us.
First off, I'd like to just acknowledge and take a moment to recognize the significant loss of losing not one but both of your parents in such a short time frame, and also to acknowledge the additional burden to you of having to not being in the same place to be able to show up for them when they needed you most. There's probably a lot of guilt and whatnot that you hang on to with that. And there's no place to park that, right?
No.
You just got to carry it. You just
Yeah.
got to keep carrying it. And it sounds like you're still having to carry that. And the workplace is expecting, business as usual. And Kathy's like, no, this is not business as usual. So you're exhausted.
Mhm.
Multiple different angles. So I think it might be worthwhile to broach that with your supervisors, your managers, and your HR department, is to say, here's my experience. I'd like part of my legacy to be sharing my experience and trying to improve to make sure that this doesn't happen to the next person. Because more and more and more of us are going to experience these same kinds of scenarios. My parents both still lived in Atlantic Canada in the Maritimes, and I was in Ontario. Didn't get to be with either one of them, just time, space. It's challenging to be there and to be everything to everyone all the time. And you got to be able to put those boundaries and say, like, where can I be most present today? Well, I'll do my best, but know that I'm not 100% right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was very open with my manager and director before I came back. I said, I'm going to come back because I need to be in the workplace for my brain. And I said, but I'm coming back at like 40%. And I said, it's like having a head injury. I drop sentences, I'll lose train of thought. I mean, sometimes I drive here and I don't even remember driving here. So I said, just be patient with me. And they have been. And I have said, I've never said I can't do anything. It's like I've always like pour it on, pour it on. I'm saying, guys, I can't do anymore. But the nature of a job, it just keeps coming. It doesn't matter. It just keeps coming. Regardless if I say I can't do anymore. I think that's my frustration. As I said, look, I'm showing you I can't do anymore. I'm saying I can't do anymore. The job is not listening.
I'm at capacity.
I'm over capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. Reached my limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just picking one priority of the day and I'm saying, this is all I can do. All I can do today.
Yeah. And that's part of, taking care of ourselves during these difficult times, be positive is blood type, but it only goes so far, right? Like your attitude and you want to, but you're just so depleted on so many different levels. It's really challenging, but continue that dialogue and advocating for what you need in order to, when you show up to work, that you can be your absolute best for your organization. So I'm in the process of shifting my whole sick leave policy to, you don't have to be, really, really sick and not being able to get out of bed in order to take a day. We work in a 100% virtual environment. So you get in front of your computer, and if you're just having one of those off days, take a wellness day. Take a couple hours of wellness time. Go get your head in the game. And when you are in front of your computer, I want you to be there and be present. And if it's one of those days, it's okay to take one of those days. You don't have to be sick. Take a wellness day so that when you do show up. But sometime I would just like to offer Kathy that if you ever want to reach out and share a story, I'm sure there are many, and you're here in Ontario, so I'll probably get some of the landscapes and some of the memories that you might have. If you ever want to chat, just reach out and
thank you.
Just reach out. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions or shares? Just being cognizant of the time, and there's a quick little poll to finish up with, if you wouldn't mind at the end. I don't see any hands.
There is one in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Joshua.
And so the question is, are there any specific approaches for coworkers with children during this phase?
That's a really good one. I think it depends on the structure of how the work environment is, like what that structure is. Are you virtual? Are you hybrid? Are you expected to be there all the time? And if it is, can I have okay, I'll just address it though. I'm going to say that this person has the capacity or the ability to do this job from home. And if they're trying to deal with this and they have children at home, is to offer them flexible hours. You have deadlines, but unless you're a frontline healthcare worker, which is a bit of a different nuance, if there's an ability to offer flexible work hours, that the job can still get done, then what difference is it going to make if it's done at 8 p.m. at night or 7 in the morning? What's the critical factor? Like, work needs to be done, deadlines need to be met, but being able to provide that plasticity in a workday to the best of our ability. And if someone's in a structured environment where they need to be there every day, help them to dive into what supports might be available through EAP or even short-term leave. But there might be a bit of a financial repercussion from that. I think as an employee raising a child with a disability, being a caregiver to my mother-in-law that lived with us, who had Alzheimer's and was a wanderer, and I had triple negative breast cancer at the same time, The twins were 9, my youngest is 6, military wife, husband's gone all the time. It was bananas. But one of the things was I was given some flexibility and the time to take off so that I could tend to my family's needs first and my own healthcare needs. So that one's a bit tricky when it comes to children, but my approach would be just to be as absolutely flexible as possible. Does anybody have any other things they could add to that or experiences within their workplace setting?
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, Linda.
Okay. Hi. I work for a post-secondary institution and I lost my 10-year-old daughter in November 27, 2023. And I'm First Nation, and part of our traditional death rituals, it's a 10-day ceremony when you lose someone. So my workplace, their policy had 3 days bereavement leave, but they also gave me the 5 days sickness leave as well. So that was 8 days paid. And then I took 2 weeks unpaid leave. But one of the things that I found out when during the whole time was they had a life insurance on their employees and our dependents. So I also received $5,000 from the life insurance for my daughter. So that was something that really helped for my family financially when we were going through, plus as well as taking those 2 weeks off. So those types of things, I didn't even know about that. That was something my employer told me, my boss. And so those types of things are also really helpful for families who are grieving a loss of a loved one.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing. I'm really sorry to hear about the loss of your daughter and the difficult time that you're having to go through experiencing that loss. That's tremendous that your employer really showed up for you in ways that were completely unexpected. But it's important to share that those policies are there, those practices are in place so that people do have those supports when they need. Stephanie, Joshua, I'll let you kind of cut me off. I could talk all day.
Yeah, I think it's time to go. I think, we're just a little bit over, and I know everyone has jobs and tasks to do. But thank you again, Laurel, for so much for just spending the time with us today and sharing your knowledge, and also all those individuals who shared today too. I know it's hard to going through this, and sharing it can be very difficult too. But just understand that your words have been heard, and hopefully, when it comes to your workplace, change happens. And like these are the conversations we need to have for the change to occur. And so as we move forward, we talked about this poll. So we're going to put the poll up very quickly so people can fill that out. Stephanie, if you want to put it up. And so the question is just, has your knowledge changed because of this session?
And I echo what Joshua said. And again, thank you with much gratitude for being able to have a platform in order to share some of our thoughts and visions of where we see compassionate workplaces going and grief and bereavement support. So thank you all.
Okay, so we're seeing somewhat, a lot. So that's great. And it's really helpful to know that, these sessions are making an impact just in your own knowledge as you move forward. And so we hope that all of you enjoyed the session today, and we ask that you complete a short survey when you close the Zoom. It'll pop up. And so registration for the next session in the series is titled "You Are Missing From Me, A Lifelong Grief of Bereaved Parents," and that is scheduled for July 10th at lunch. And so that will be put into the chat for you to register if that's something you'd want to. Also, if you want to be notified for any future sessions coming up, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. We always sort of mention those in there. And so our aim is to provide a copy of the presentation recordings, the session summary notes, and any kind of other resources to you within the next 7 working days. So just watch for your email for this information, or you can visit the center's website for more information. So as we come to a close, also would like to mention that registration is open for our upcoming All Together Symposium on October 4th of this year, which will be hosted within Vancouver, BC at the Pinnacle Harbourfront Hotel. So this is going to be an exciting day of workshops, networking, and learning with noted community and healthcare experts in compassionate communities and palliative care. So more information can be found on our website for that. So thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.